All right, guys, welcome to the show. Can you believe it? NFL Week 16. I'm going to get you guys prepared for your fantasy football playoffs. We're talking starts and sits. We're talking latest news and notes. We are talking everything to get you guys prepared for, believe it or not, NFL Week 16. Now, there's 18 weeks in the NFL season. A lot of you guys in your fantasy football playoffs. In some leagues, predicated on which league you're in, this is the Fantasy Football Championship. This means everything. But understand, guys, a lot of teams, right, might be giving up. A lot of teams, like, for example, the Texans, want that first overall pick next year in the NFL draft. So maybe their players aren't trying, right? We see guys like Dameon Pierce is out for the rest of the season. So there's a lot of question marks with a lot of players when it comes to fantasy football and whether or not there's incentive for some of these players to play. Either way, we're going to cover the optimal plays at each position, but you need to be aware of the implications, right? The playoff picture per se. Now, there's a lot of teams that could still make the NFL playoffs, except for like the Rams or something like that, right? But there's only a handful of teams that are out, but literally everyone's got this outside chance, but so many different scenarios have to play into effect for them to make the actual playoffs, okay? So we're more focused on the players, how are they going to play for fantasy this week? So I'm going to go over the starts and sits, make sure you guys are championship ready and prepared for this week, and of course, talking some news here. Now, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe. Tonight, we've got some football game. Am I overly excited about the game? Who is it? Jacksonville and the Jets. 8:15 tonight. Jets are the favorite. Both these guys need a win here today. Again, some reality playoff implications. Jets being the favorite, obviously the home team gets the edge slightly there. Again, both desperate teams to win, especially with the Jets in that division. But either way, guys, when you're watching the game, enhance that game watching experience. Head on over right now to Hooters.com and download the app, okay? Hooters.com or download the app. Use code FFC20 to save, guys, $10 on an order of 30 or more on takeout or delivery, guys. Try the football bundles. They're out right now. Bring them in, guys. Order in some amazing food, guys, this weekend and through the playoffs. Playoff football, what's better than, watching football? Having wings while watching football, right? Hooters.com. And upon checkout, guys, FFC20 is the code you want to use to save. Available at select locations across the USA. And also grab the 2023 Hooters calendar as well upon checkout. That is available right now. So Hooters.com, download the app. Go try the food, order some in. FFC20 is the code you want to use to save. And remember, upon checkout, grab that calendar, okay? There's a lot of goals I got to set. Got to have my calendar up this year, right? Let's talk about this. New to the channel, subscribe. Drop your questions below. I'll try to get to as many as I humanly possibly can. If you want direct access, Patreon group. But drop your questions below. I will get to as many as I humanly possibly can. All right, drop them below. Now let's start off with the quarterback position. I'm going to rapid fire here. Guys have the optimal matchup. That being said, Dak Prescott, tough matchup versus Philly. Do you start him? Unless you've got a better, significantly better option. Trevor Lawrence coming off a hot week. Tough matchup. 8th hardest versus position. Jalen Hurts is out, right? So do you start Gardner Minshew? He's got a tough matchup versus Dallas. So you got to be aware. You got to be aware and say, hey, who am I starting? How tough is the matchup? Like Justin Fields. So just a couple big names have tough matchups. Dak Prescott, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, who's out. So Minshew could be starting, versus Dallas. You got Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Russell Wilson, not that you trust him, and Tua versus Green Bay, believe it or not, and Joe Burrow all have relatively tough matchups, okay? Start them if they're your starting quarterback. I mean, you have to. We're in fantasy football playoffs. Go with the person that took you there, right? I mean, they may have a tough matchup, but sometimes matchups don't matter. But either way, optimal matchups here. Sam Darnold. I mean, I don't know if you trust him. He's been boring at best. Arguably the easiest matchup versus Detroit. Aaron Rodgers, Davis Mills. Hard to trust Davis Mills, although he's got to be making a case right now because he's probably not going to be the starter next year. Imagine him finishing strong. He's got a good matchup versus Tennessee. Geno Smith versus KC. Great matchup. Mitch Trubisky. Do not trust this guy at all. Good matchup. We're going to see what's going to happen with him or Pickett. Got to see who starts there. Again, you got to check the game time decisions because there's a lot of things that are up in the air at the quarterback position. A lot of uncertainty with some players, again, including Hurts being gone, new quarterbacks coming in, some injuries. Guys like Darnold starting, if he's starting, right? Zach Wilson, that quarterback situation. Wilson had a good week last week. Is he trustworthy? Good matchup. Daniel Jones, Tom Brady, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert. Again, Lamar Jackson being back, banged up. Check the injury status before he goes in. I'm not seeing any designation here. But again, Lamar Jackson, I definitely be concerned considering he's missed his 8th straight practice, okay? Hopefully you guys have better options here. That's why I always tell you guys, when you're drafting, make sure you get a backup quarterback, okay, with upside. Justin Herbert had a terrible 14-point week, does have a good matchup, bounce back this week versus Indy. Pat Mahomes must start, obviously. Brock Purdy, Desmond Ridder, guys that have mid-range matchups, adjust accordingly, right? So you're saying, who do I start? It's very simple, guys. You're in week 16, it's your playoffs. Look at consistency. Start the person that brought you there. Right now, Justin Herbert brought me here to the championships. Had a bad week. Do I trust him? I still have to trust him. He had a bad week. He can only bounce back. What goes down must come, especially if quarterback's been consistent as of late. So, guys, you got to use some common sense here, but start your starters for the most part, unless the starter has a significantly tough matchup and you've got a better backup. Does that make sense? Moving on to the running back position, Derrick Henry, guys. Great matchup. He's been as consistent as they come. My first overall pick this year, Derrick Henry, amazing matchup. Isaiah Pacheco, okay, Alvin Kamara, Zach Moss. Not that I trust Zach Moss, but he's got a good matchup versus position, right? Austin Eckler, good matchup versus position. Now, Eckler last week, had a touchdown to save his life that week because he was banged up. His shoulder was banged up, was off the field. Kelly came in, hoarded a touchdown, but ended up, redeeming himself. Still managed to get himself 15 points last week. Najee Harris, do you trust him? That's a big question mark here. He's been safe the past couple weeks. Does have a good matchup versus Vegas. Singletary and the running backs for Chicago. Good matchup. Now, again, we talked about Indy running backs, obviously Taylor being out. We talked about Moss coming in, all these other guys. Do we trust them? They do have a good match. Whoever's starting, it's going to be a bit of a committee there, disaster of a committee. Indy's pretty much almost toast. Again, they're playing the Chargers. Good matchup versus position, okay? Other guys, DeAndre Swift, been safe at best. Very hard to trust. He was an 8th overall pick, or amongst running backs, top 8. Been crap in the bed. Good matchup. So, guys, good matchups here. We got Dalvin Cook, good matchup. Najee Harris, Austin Eckler, some big names. Derrick Henry, all optimal matchups versus position. Saquon, he's got to play for his contract here. Pretty decent matchup. Mid-range, him and Nick Chubb. Tony Pollard, mid-range matchup. Josh Jacobs, mid-range matchup. David Montgomery, mid-range matchup. Who's got it in tough? Joe Mixon, Brian Robinson, who've been safe the past week or two. Miles Sanders, got a tough matchup here. So, Robinson, Mixon, Sanders. Christian McCaffrey, who's been solid, does have a tough matchup, but you don't sit Christian McCaffrey. You just don't do it. Travis Etienne, very inconsistent. Again, do you trust Travis Etienne to your fantasy football playoffs? For a lot of sheeps, that was your first running back off the board, right? If you went 0 RB. He does have a tough matchup versus the Jets. Cam Akers, hard to trust. Kenneth Walker, relatively tough matchup versus position, okay? Now you know who's got the tough matchups position. You guys could drop a question below if you guys are still torn on who to start. Wide receivers here. Again, we're looking at consistency. Who took you this far? How consistent have they been? Do I trust them? That's a big question because, again, it is a big week. You want to look at guys that have been consistent. Now, there's been some volatility. Devontae Adams was consistent. Easy matchup this week, but again, he had 7 points last week, right? I told you Waller would be a thorn. He came in and hoarded away a touchdown. So, yes, consistency is there, but sometimes they could have bad weeks as well. Matt Collins, Hunter Renfrow are there. Waller are there. Could Adams screw you in your fantasy football playoffs? It's very possible, but he does have a good matchup versus Pittsburgh. You got to start him, right? DJ Moore, good matchup. Chris Moore, Brandon Cooks could be back this week, right? Brandon Cooks, years to wow us, we're not wowed. He's been, average at best this year. Injured, banged up, Davis Mills could end up with a touchdown, could have a safe floor, but he's not a guy, even though a good matchup, not a guy you can trust this week, okay? Especially with your fantasy football players. Very hard to trust no matter how favorable that matchup is. A.J. Brown, Smith, do you trust him? You got to start him even if there's a backup quarterback in play. Minshew, doesn't matter. You got to start these guys. They've been consistent, especially A.J. Brown, more consistent, both coming off good weeks. How do you sit A.J. Brown, even though there's a backup quarterback? Very hard to do. You got to start him, right? DK Metcalf, start. Great matchup. Garrett Wilson, been consistent. Got to start him. Great matchup versus Jacksonville. Drake London, been safe and boring, but safe and relatively consistent. Great matchup versus Baltimore. Stephon Diggs, obviously must start, and a great matchup. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, a decent matchup versus position. Again, some of the guys that got it in tough, just so you're aware. Christian Kirk and Jacksonville, again, Trevor's been hot, but either way, they do have a tough matchup. Zay Jones has been red hot the past couple of weeks, but he does have a tough matchup versus the Jets. Just be aware of that. You can start Zay Jones all you want, but tougher matchup versus the Jets. Juju, tough matchup to name a couple other people. Tyreek Hill, tough matchup versus Green Bay. Keenan Allen, tough matchup, and CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase. But do you sit these guys? CeeDee Lamb, absolutely not. Keenan Allen, absolutely not. You do not sit them, but be aware. Tyreek Hill, do you sit them? No. Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Jamar Chase, tough matchups versus position. Do you sit them? No, but you're aware that they have a tough matchup versus position. So you're like, hey man, they really crapped the bed. It wasn't an easy day for them out there today. Now, I'm going to go for some tight ends here and some defense. Make sure you guys head over to prizepicks.com. Enhance that game watching experience. Now, some of you guys may be out of the fantasy football playoffs. That's okay. You can continue to play DFS. Prizepicks.com. The code you want to use is DFS Lion to enhance that game watching experience, guys. Pick 2 to 5 players. Pick more or less on their particular prop, more or less rushing yards for, let's say, Derrick Henry, whatever they have designated there as his rushing yard stat line. More or less, select, put a couple together, and win, guys. PrizePicks.com, DFS Lion. Go try it out. There's a link here below. Let's go over some tight ends here. Tight end, start your more secure tight end. You've had consistency now. Mark Andrews has been relatively inconsistent all year. He does have a good matchup versus Atlanta. Travis Kelce, Hawkinson, all must starts this week. Other guys that have good matchups here. Robert Tonyan, very hard to trust. Even though he's got a good matchup, try to find a better alternative there for him. Hayden Hurst has been sucking. He's been banged up. Be aware of that. Look to see if he's starting. Either way, he's got a good matchup. Anyone from Cincinnati. Pat Freiermuth, right? Been kind of safe and steady. Does have a good matchup, though. Austin Hooper, Tennessee versus Houston. That's a pretty decent matchup there. Noah Fant, decent matchup. Gerald Everett, people thinking of starting him. Safe matchup for him. Higbee got a touchdown last week as well. All safe matchups versus position. Tight end, guys, you should know who your tight ends are at this point. If you don't, drop a question below, or that's pretty pathetic if you don't, guys. Make sure you guys start a tight end that's consistent. That's what you need here. I gave you guys some that have a good matchup here. Now, defense to start, you definitely want to stream a defense if you guys are in a bind here. But either or, I think the Bills, that was a team I've been riding for all season. They've got a good matchup. Chargers, Broncos, Titans. I do like the Chargers versus Indy matchup. I think Foles is stepping in there. Matt Ryan being benched after the terrible loss. So Chargers, Broncos versus the Rams, who have nothing to play for. And sometimes that could be scary. But either way, Broncos, good matchup. Titans, Bills, Rams, Browns. Again, Chargers, Broncos, Titans, Bills, Rams, Browns. We got the Lions versus Carolina, 49ers versus Washington, Buccaneers versus Arizona, with Kyler Murray being out for the year. Okay, Jacksonville versus Jets, you can make an argument. Zach Wilson's been relatively inconsistent. So take a quick glance here, take a screenshot. These are some good defenses to start and maybe some to stream based on matchup for the season. All right, guys. Now, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe. We go the entire year long. Make sure, if you're new to the channel, subscribe. Drop your starts and sits questions below. This is it, guys. Fantasy football playoffs, fantasy football championships for many. Go out there and dominate your week this week. Subscribe. We go year round. We'll be starting to roll out the rankings for next year and talk for fantasy football 2023. Can you believe it? This year has flown by. Subscribe, thumbs up, and go order some Hooters, guys. FFC20 is the code you want to use. Go right now. We'll talk soon. I'm out.